Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Budget Lockup and welcome to Budget 2017 September Update. I want to start by recognizing we're on the traditional territory of the Esquimalt and Songhees people and thank them for the ability to meet on their territory. Now, I look around this room and I can see a number of you who have attended many more lockups than I ever have. So I just want to start off by giving an apology right from the start because I have no stories about living on a farm. I have no stories about driving a tractor. But I do want to ask you to indulge me just for a minute as it is my first budget as finance minister. And so I do want to take a minute to acknowledge my grandparents in this budget, which may seem like a little bit of an odd thing to do for a first budget, but I hope you'll see why as I go along. I was raised with my grandparents, as some of you may know, lived with them in my early years, and then in later years, always lived within a few blocks of them. In fact, bought the house that I grew up in and raised my kids in that same house. We never had a lot of money. My grandparents never had a lot of money. And that certainly meant that every dollar they did have was spent very wisely. It was stretched to the max, it was carefully spent, and it was very well thought out. And I have to say that as a kid, I didn't appreciate those values as much as I do now as an adult. I can remember being embarrassed when we'd come home and my grandmother would have washed out the plastic bags and hung them on the clothesline along with the clothes to make sure that they were reused. Or the fact that we had to wash our wax paper when we came home from our lunches so we could use it the next day to wrap our sandwiches. We didn't ever have new furniture. We didn't have new appliances. My grandmother always believed that if secondhand was good enough, that's what you used. So I think, no matter how squeezed my grandparents were, the other piece I always remember is that I lived in the most generous household I could imagine. Whether it was kids, whether it was foster kids, whether it was neighbors, whether it was community, if there was someone in need, my grandparents were always the first ones who were there. They were the first ones there to offer up, regardless of how tight the money was that month, to offer up support. Now, I have to also say, because I could hear my grandmother's voice otherwise, that my grandmother was no pushover. That she expected you to justify why you wanted the resources. She expected you to explain what you would be using it for. But if you had a good rationale, if it was something that was important, then she was the first one to be there. And I have to say that in this role, since I've been finance minister, I've thought a lot about my grandparents. I've thought a lot about my grandparents. I've thought a lot of people of that generation, and in fact of today's generation, who recognize how important it is to stretch a dollar, who recognize hard work, who recognize how important it is to help people that need a hand up. And so I hope you'll see as we go through this budget that those are the values that I certainly bring to my work. Those are the values you saw reflected in the throne speech, and those are the values that are presented in Budget 2017 September Update. So we'll get started. First slide. We're going to start, as you can see, with BC's economic outlook. And as you can see from this slide, the real GDP outlook in this Budget 17 update for 2016 and 2017 are higher than what was projected in the February budget. And you heard this in public accounts when I was presenting the public accounts as well, that the economy performed better than expected. We saw stronger than anticipated consumer spending and export activity in the latter part of 2016. That's primarily what's responsible for the upward revision that you can see in the ministry's real GDP for 2016, from 3% to 3.6% growth. And meanwhile, if you take a look at 2017, the year-to-date key indicators, everything from employment, and we'll get into these a little bit more as we go along with the slide presentation, everything from employment to retail sales and housing starts and exports have exceeded expectations. And so you can see from this chart that the ministry's forecast for BC's real GDP growth of 2.9% in 2017 is higher than the 2.1% that was projected in the February budget. And then you can also see that the outlook for 2018 to 2021 remains unchanged from the previous budget, as the balance of risks to the economy remain unchanged. And we'll get a little bit into that as we're going along. Next slide. So this slide talks about the forecasting that we're using in this budget. And as you can see from this slide, the overall outlook for BC's economy continues to call for stable economic growth. We've been very prudent in our forecasts for BC's real GDP growth compared to, as you can see in the slide, the Economic Forecast Council projections. As you can see on this picture, the outlook for 2017 is 0.1 percentage point lower than the Forecast Council. And we've also built, as you go years ahead, we built in 0.2 percentage points of prudence for 2018 and beyond. And again, as I said, I'll talk a little bit about the risks to the forecast and to our economy as we move along. But I think it's important, again, to state that that prudence is built into this budget update in September. Next slide. So the previous slide showed the Economic Forecast Council projections, and this slide, as you can see, speaks to the private sector average, which is a subset of the Economic Forecast Council. The private sector certainly believes, once again, that BC is going to be among the top performers in economic growth this year and next. But they're also raising cautions, and I think it's important that we pay attention to those, hence the prudence that you saw built in the previous slide. TD, one of the private sector forecasters, noted that over the medium term, the wealth effects from the provincial housing market on spending are expected to start diminishing. RBC, again, one of the private sector forecasters, explained that, and I quote, "They continue to expect that housing-related activity will contribute less to BC's expansion." And then going forward, they further expect moderation in BC's economic growth due in part, and again I quote, "to renewed downward pressure on the housing market emerging in the face of rising interest rates." So again, those are pieces that we're paying attention to. RBC further raised the issue of the softwood lumber trade conflict, and again, I'll talk about this a little further as we go along, but it's another restraining factor that's going to weigh on our exports and certainly the manufacturing sector. Steady growth, but cautions on the horizon, I think, are important for all of us as we take a look at these numbers. Next slide, David. Thank you. So the next series of slides track the key economic indicators that relate to our growth. So we're going to begin, as you can see, with employment. For 2017 and the first 7 months of the year, BC's economy created 88,500 jobs, which was an increase of 3.7% compared to the same time on the same period of the last year. The largest job gains were in the areas of finance, insurance, and real estate. So again, speaking about the housing market and the employment numbers, again, relating to the housing market. That was followed by construction and then culture and recreation. The unemployment number for BC has averaged 5.4% to date as of July, and the labor force has increased 2.9 percentage points over that same time period. Now, if we do a comparison, if we take a look at the numbers, the employment numbers for Canada, over that same time period, we see that employment was up 1.7%, and the unemployment rate averaged 6.6%. Again, these are averages to July 2017. So the outlook, the future outlook, forecast for BC shows that employment will increase by 3.1% for 2017. 2018 is expected to move ahead of 1.2 percentage, and that'll be followed by 1.1% increases in the medium term, 2019 to 2021. And some of you may know, just to keep you completely up to date with the data, that the labor force survey data for August 2017 came out on September 8th. So just to keep you up to date, it showed that employment, the numbers are very similar to what I've just described. The numbers for BC showed that employment increased 3.8% in the first 8 months, so that's adding on the month of August. and our unemployment rate averaged 5.3% to August, which is down from 6.1% during the same period last year. So again, strong employment numbers with the cautions that I've referred to, and that I'll refer to a little bit more as we go along. So this slide speaks to consumer spending, and that continues to be a source of strength for all of us in British Columbia, a source of strength for our economy. We've seen retail sales up 8.8% in the first 6 months of 2017. That's compared to the same 6 months of 2016. And we've continued to see that. Those of you who've looked at the quarterly reports and certainly who took a look at public accounts knows that consumer spending in BC has been rising at an elevated pace for the last few years. That really, again, I believe is related a lot to our historic interest rates, low interest rates. Housing activity, again, has a lot to do with retail sales. Increased tourism, which is helping British Columbia. The dollar has helped us in that regard, and improving employment growth. So those are really the areas that focus on the piece around retail sales. We do expect it to again continue to rise, but level out. We expect in 2018 that we'll see about a 4% growth in retail sales, and 3.6% annually over the medium term is the number that we built in. That's 2019 to 2021. So this slide speaks to the major components of retail sales. Where are the sales happening? What areas, what sectors of retail sales have adjusted? So as you can see, the notable year-to-date gains occurred with building materials and garden equipment and supplies. Again, a piece of that related to housing, obviously. Gas stations, price of gas makes a big difference when you're looking at these numbers, and motor vehicle and parts dealers. The lowest gains you can see from this slide were furniture and home furnishing stores. And then the other, I'm sure some of you always want to know what the other category is that's listed here. The other includes everything from electronics to appliances, sporting goods, books and music stores, general merchandising, and miscellaneous store retailers. The next slide. So back to housing again. These are BC's housing starts, and as you can see, the housing starts remain strong and in fact are at some of the highest levels that we've seen over the last decade. We saw a brief cooling off period from October 2016 to February 2017, as you can see from this slide. But we continue in British Columbia to remain well above the historic average. The historic average is 29,465 annualized units, and as you can see, we're at 41,251. So we continue to see housing starts in British Columbia very strong. And I think it's just important to note as you take a look at this slide that the strength of housing starts is an important indicator to take a look at because supply obviously is a key component of housing affordability, but housing starts do not solve the affordability crisis that we're facing. That's going to take much more. And again, I think we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along, but I think it's important to note on that slide. So now taking a look at BC's exports. Again, after a time period in our province of mixed growth, we have seen a strengthening of exports since the middle of last year. Year to date, the value of BC's international merchandise exports rose 16.6% compared to the same time period of 2016. Now again, just as we did with the sales, it's important to note that all exports haven't performed equally. There is a difference when you're taking a look at exports. Energy exports increased sharply in the first half of this year. They were at a very depressed level, as you know, and so any growth is going to make that difference. You saw energy exports starting to climb. where non-energy exports have declined over the same time period. So, for example, that would be exports of metal ore, that would be motor vehicles and parts, farming, fishing, industry, and immediate food products. So we've seen a drop in those exports. So although, as I said, this continues to show that we see a growth after a flattening of exports, it's not all equal when it comes to the export market. I just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about international export markets, because as you can see from the slide, BC's largest trading partner continues to be the US. However, compared to other provinces, certainly our trading partners are more diverse, which gives us a little bit of a cushion to be able to navigate any kind of economic shocks that occur over the next while. So if we take a look at the U.S., we saw steady economic activity in the U.S., and that's benefited us. That's benefited us in British Columbia with exporters. Exports to the U.S. Are up 13.9% year to date to June 2017, again compared to the first 6 months of 2016. And our exports to China increased by 10% year to date to June 2017, again compared to the similar time. And I'll come back to the U.S. market because I think obviously many of you will be thinking about the issue of NAFTA. And the upcoming trade talks is going to have an impact or could have a potential impact on the issue of our exports. Just on softwood lumber, because again, that's obviously front and center for our communities in British Columbia. In 2016, just as a number for those of you who are interested, softwood lumber exports made up 20% of BC's total goods exports to the U.S. So not insignificant, perhaps not as large as it had been in previous years, but certainly not insignificant when it comes to our economy in British Columbia and when it comes to the economy in particularly the interior of our province. As I mentioned earlier, BC certainly is impacted by any other jurisdiction when it comes to our economy. We're a small, open economy, and so any economic trends, any economic growth that you see across the country and around the globe matter greatly for our performance. And so there are some risks for us to pay attention to as we're looking ahead. The 2017 consensus outlook for the U.S. economy is slightly lower than expected earlier in the year. I mentioned there was a expected steady growth earlier in the year. We're now seeing a relatively weak first quarter GDP result in the U.S., and so it's expected again that that's going to weaken slightly. Although again, overall U.S. real GDP grew by 2% in the first half of 2017. So that again shows a buoyant economy, but obviously the issue of trade is going to have a big impact on what happens there. The Bank of Canada, as you all know, raised its target for overnight rates twice in the past 3 months. And again, we're expecting that the Bank of Canada is going to continue to tighten their monetary policy, which is a downside risk for the Canadian outlook. We also know that our Canadian outlook could be impacted by trade. So it's obviously not an issue simply for BC, it's an issue for Canada. Where Canada goes, again, that's going to have an impact on British Columbia. China is transitioning to slow growth, although I use that lightly because I think, as all of us know, slow growth in China continues to be well above anyone else. They're following double-digit growth rates in the previous decade. So you now see the annual growth target for 2017 for China around 6.5%, which is a drop from the 7% annual growth target for 2016. So again, I think it's relative when you're taking a look at growth numbers, particularly for China. Economic activity in Japan has been modest. It's accelerated a little bit in the second quarter of 2017. But again, labor shortages are a huge challenge in Japan because of their demographics. That's going to have an impact, obviously, on their economic situation. And then finally on this slide, just to touch on the Eurozone. The Eurozone, as you know, has high unemployment in a number of countries, ongoing sovereign debt issues, which again are going to have a big impact, and uncertainty around the UK and what's going to occur with the UK is obviously going to have an impact there as well. Next slide, thanks. So as I mentioned, it's important to pay attention to the risks to the fiscal plan. We certainly, as I said, expect to continue to see steady growth, but there are some clouds on the horizon that we have to pay attention to. I think starting with wildfires, and I think all of us in this room have thought about and will continue to think about the families and communities and businesses that are impacted by the wildfires. This is going to have both a short-term and long-term economic impact on those communities, and I think that's important to acknowledge. Impact on the forest industry when you're looking at the kind of fiber that has gone up, and so it's going to be both a short-term and a long-term issue for us to have to pay attention to, and the fire season isn't over yet. So that's something that we're going to have to continue to pay attention to. You've heard the Attorney General speak about ICBC's undetermined fiscal sustainability and the challenges that are faced there. He is taking steps to address that. You know that from the presentation, but it certainly remains as a risk to our fiscal plan. It's important to acknowledge that. I talked earlier about softwood lumber and NAFTA, again, an unknown. We hope that it won't have the kind of impact that people are talking about, but it's something that we have to include as a risk to our fiscal plan. New compensation mandate, although we're ahead of the game, the existing contracts continue until 2019. It's important that we start taking a look at planning now because that's obviously a piece that's going to have an impact and that's going to have to be built in the budget. So it's important to acknowledge it now. And then increasing interest rates, everything from consumer spending to housing. Increasing interest rates are going to have a real impact and are pieces that need to be considered when we're taking a look at risks in our economy. So now let's take a look at the three-year fiscal plan and talk about some of the details that are in the plan. You can see that the Budget 2017 update maintains surplus results over the fiscal plan period, over the 3 years. The surpluses are comparable to the February budget 2017 amounts. As you can see, the numbers here, the February budget amounts in the 3 years were $295 million, $244 million, and $223 million. So you can see it's very comparable to the numbers that have been projected in February, in February's budget. I mentioned earlier the prudence. We have maintained that in this budget. We believe that's critical. Again, if you take a look at the risks that are ahead, we believe that's good planning to ensure that prudence has been built in and maintained in the budget. And this budget also includes contingencies in each of the 3 years, $600 million in 17-18, $300 million in 18-19, and $350 million in 19-20. Now, some of you may be wondering why the larger number in contingencies in 17-18. Again, when you have a new government coming in and when you're implementing new programs and services, demands in some cases may not be known until a few months into the program. And the example I'd use is the adult basic education program, where you will have enrollment starting in September. Those numbers may not be fixed until the enrollment happens over the next month or so. And so again, we felt it was prudent to build in some additional resources and contingency to be able to address those demands that may come up. Another example, of course, would be the bus pass for people with disabilities. Again, that's being worked on. You heard that in the throne speech. That's going to come in the new year. That's a cost that will need to be built in, but the program is still being determined exactly what that looks like and what the fiscal costs will be. And so that, again, is part of the prudence that you're seeing in the contingencies that are here. Under capital spending, you can see that taxpayer-supported capital spending of $14.6 billion over the fiscal plan is, again, very comparative to the budget that came out in February. But it now includes, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along, it now includes $500 million in new housing initiatives over 3 years. And that is one of our promises and commitments. We'll see that that'll be included there. Self-supported capital spending no longer includes the George Massey Tunnel Replacement Project. As you know, the procurement was cancelled on that while a review happens around the best way to address the congestion. So that's now no longer included in the self-supporting. And then on the issue of debt, government's debt track reflects a one-time shift, and you'll all know this again from presentations, the one-time shift to $3.5 billion from self-supporting to taxpayer-supporting debt because of the reclassification of the Port Mann debt following the elimination of the tolls. So that's included here. Debt to GDP ratio continues to remain low, continues to remain affordable, and it includes, as I said, the 1.2 percentage point impact in 2017-18 and out years related to the Port Mann debt shift. So this slide just refers to changes again from the February budget, and there are a number of changes that we've included, and I'll just give you a rundown of a few of those. And the changes also include, just so you know, the Q1 forecast updates. So this shows you there's a $3.6 billion revenue improvement, mainly in the area of taxes, and again, we'll get to that as we go along. That's offset by $1.8 billion in spending. Again, these are three-year numbers, including the over $660 million for fire management and emergency response costs above what was budgeted in February. These changes also include new policy measures, $1.8 billion in new personal and corporate income tax and carbon tax revenues built into this three-year budget, which is offset by $1 billion related to the 50% reduction in MSP premiums and higher low-income climate action tax credits. As well, as I mentioned, $2.4 billion in new investments over 3 years in the areas of improving affordability, enhancing services, and building a sustainable economy. And again, I'll get into the specifics as we continue on. This slide speaks to taxpayer-supported debt. Government surpluses, as you know, and this is those of you who attended public accounts will know these numbers, resulted in falling operating debt, forecast to end the fiscal period at zero, the first time since the 1970s. And you'll remember the surplus, according to the balanced budget legislation, surpluses from previous years go towards the operating debt, and hence the changes in numbers. Our government will continue to make investments in capital infrastructure. We believe that's critical for not only building British Columbia, but ensuring that the delivery of important services can happen. Capital is critical to all of that. That infrastructure is critical to all of that. Our capital debt grows by $11.8 billion over the three-year plan. And this growth, as I mentioned, also includes the $3.5 billion one-time impact of the reclassification of the Transportation Investment Corporation debt following the elimination of the tolls on the Port Mann Bridge. And then the remaining $8.3 billion of capital debt growth is spread across health, education, housing, transportation, and other infrastructure areas that we're spending on. This again just speaks to the operating debt elimination. The operating debt is now forecast to be eliminated by the end of 1920, which is 1 year ahead of the previous forecast. And again, that's mainly due to improved operating results and the higher surplus that we saw in the year of 16-17. So as I mentioned, we're going to continue with capital investments. Continuing to build our province is critical and is one of our commitments to the people of British Columbia. So the changes since the February budget, this slide shows the continued capital investments in our province, with one change from the February budget, and that's our housing investment. As I mentioned, housing initiatives of $500 million has been added to the capital that was already included in the February budget. And so this shows you over the plan that we continue to have record capital investments. We believe good investments for British Columbia, both for jobs as well as for infrastructure that's needed by communities. The next slide just speaks to the specifics of that spending. As you can see, I mentioned the total over the 3-year plan. Taxpayer-supported capital spending will total $14.6 billion. And that includes the completion of existing projects that are already in the queue, that many that have been started already, as well as new investments that will include everything from schools to hospitals to roads. So just as some example, the education spending that you see here includes 5,200 new spaces for Surrey to be able to address the enrollment growth in that area. The transportation, for example, includes Highway 1 right here in the island. The Admiral Road Mackenzie Avenue interchange is included in the transportation area, as well as Salmon Arm West Highway 1 improvements. In the area of advanced education in Surrey, the SFU campus, there's an energy systems engineering building that's being built. That's included in that category. These are just examples of pieces that are in each of these. In the area of health, there's the Vancouver General Hospital and the Jim Pattison Pavilion operating rooms that's included in the area of health. Housing, as I mentioned, the housing units to address both affordability and homelessness, and I'll come to those in a minute. And then we've also got the Maples Adolescent Treatment Center included here as well. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of the projects. As I said, existing projects that are continuing on, as well as our new investment in the area of housing. So the next few slides speak to the priority areas that you heard outlined in the throne speech, and the priority areas that are the roadmap that this budget is built on. We are committed, as you know, to improving affordability, to enhancing services that are critically needed in British Columbia, and building a strong and sustainable economy. And so $1.8 billion is the new 3-year total of new spending. That's excluding the tolling charges that I talked about earlier. And these are for programs and services that we believe are both critically needed for people in British Columbia, but will also help grow our economy and build a sustainable economy. Because as you've heard me say already, and I'll say many times over the next while, a budget doesn't stand alone. A budget is linked directly, and the economy is linked directly to investments in opportunity, investments in people in British Columbia. Education would be a good example of that, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So starting with the area of improving affordability. We have included in this budget $472 million to increase social assistance rates. This is not going to solve all of the challenges faced by individuals on social assistance, but after 10 years, this is the first meaningful increase that has been seen in 10 years. We believe that this is a start to addressing people who are directly in need for these supports. This is effective October 2017, but it will come on the September check for individuals. That's when their October money comes, is on their September check, and so they'll see a difference immediately a couple of weeks after this budget today. That brings, just so that people know, that brings the amount of social assistance for a single person to $710 a month, and an individual on disability assistance to $1,133 a month. And these rate increases will directly benefit 190,000 British Columbians receiving social assistance, long overdue. This slide speaks to our housing pressures and housing affordability. Obviously, a real crisis point, not simply in the Lower Mainland, as many people might believe, but in fact, being seen more and more here in the island and across British Columbia. And whether it's families who are looking to buy a home, whether it's tenants who are trying to find affordable rental accommodations, or whether it's those who are homeless and in direct need of housing. We believe that it's critical that we develop a comprehensive housing strategy in this province that looks at all the ideas and all the solutions out there. And that includes tax measures, that includes rebates for renters, that includes closing loopholes, building housing, co-op housing, and partnerships partnerships that need to be built with all levels of government, municipal, First Nations, the private sector. That's going to take some time. That's work that's underway this fall. I'll be working with the Minister of Housing. There obviously this crosses over ministries, and so we're going to be looking at that comprehensive plan. I think it's important to note when the government brought in the foreign buyers, the previous government brought in the foreign buyers tax. As you know, you saw a bit of a dip in the housing market and around housing, which has now started climbing up again and certainly hasn't addressed the affordability. So we believe it's important to look at housing affordability not in a piecemeal approach, because one area is not going to fix it, but in fact in a comprehensive approach. And that's the plan we're going to work on over the fall, is to look at all measures and all ideas and all approaches that are coming forward. And some of those discussions between the private sector, between stakeholders has already begun for the Minister and I. But we also felt, while that work's underway, that we needed to make a first step. And so the housing initiatives that you see in this budget are a start towards that plan. So you will see $208 million in capital spending over 4 years for affordable rental housing projects. The operating costs are $3 million over 3 years because these projects will be run by not-for-profit societies, and almost all of their operating costs will be covered through rental revenue. But these will be dedicated rental units built in British Columbia. And they will be built for a range of people across our province. They will include seniors housing. They will include housing for families. It will include housing for people with mental health issues. So it will be a broad base of rental housing that's being built. The second major investment that we're putting in when it comes to housing is $291 million over 2 years to build and over $170 million to operate 2,000 new modular housing units for people who are homeless. And again, this includes the resources to be able to provide 24/7 staffing and support services, because that's one of the areas that people have called for. Often you'll look at the capital spend without the operating dollars to provide the support for people who are homeless, who often need that additional support to be able to maintain housing. And this spend and this promise and this commitment in this budget include both. Include the capital spend as well as the support for individuals to be able to maintain housing as we go along. So there's a lot of work to do. We recognize that there are a lot of pieces that still need to be addressed that aren't in this budget. That's the work around the comprehensive strategy that we're going to take a look at. But we believe this is a great start towards beginning to address that issue. This slide speaks to the issue of tolls, and this is an announcement that has already occurred, as you know. This deals with both affordability and fairness. The fact that south of the Fraser, individuals south of the Fraser were stuck paying tolls when other new roads, new bridges were built, and others were not, was a fairness that had to be, an unfairness that had to be addressed. And so you can see here $479 million, and that consists of $431 million in revenue loss and related fiscal impacts, and $48 million that's an increase to the Ministry of Transportation budget to fund Port Mann Bridge maintenance costs. And I think it's important to note as well that these are 3-year totals, but they don't at this point include any estimates for the last 2 years for golden years and the issue of taking the tolls off golden years. It's owned by TransLink. We have a 1-year deal with TransLink. Those are negotiations going on, so those are resources that will be built in the budget in year 2 and year 3 as those negotiations are completed. So year 1 is built in right now for golden years, not years 2 and years 3. MSP premiums, and I want to take a little bit of time on the issue of MSP premiums. You will see in this budget that we have cut MSP premiums by 50% for all British Columbians. You will remember in the February budget that the previous government proposed an approach for MSP premiums to look at setting a limit around when people would have their 50% MSP premiums reduced. And as we worked through the plan, it was very clear that the previous government's plan was unworkable in a number of ways. The plan would include and would require additional administration, extensive administration for the application process. You'll remember the government talked about a cap of $120,000 and reducing premiums for anyone under $120,000. Our plan, as you know, is to eliminate MSP premiums by the end of 4 years. And so to build a large, extensive, again, application process, to add complexity to a system that is already complex and that needs to be eliminated, did not make good economic sense. It would have required individuals, if their MSP premiums were being paid by their employer, the only way for the employer to be able to apply for the reduction in the MSP premiums would have meant that individuals would have had to share their tax income and their tax forms with their employer, because as many of you may know, MSP is based on a family's income, not an individual's income. And so the individual would have had to, if their employer was going to claim the 50% for them, if they were making under $120,000, they would have had to share their family's income tax information. All kinds of privacy issues arise from that area. Employers would have had to take on the burden of looking at that and ensuring that information was shared. And then I think the other piece that's really important to note is that application programs that have application processes and anyone who's dealt with an individual who struggled with MSP and paying their premiums knows is complex, and often people will not apply, and often, in fact, it's the low-income people who do not end up applying for those benefits, not aware of the benefits, and don't apply. So given all of that, given the complexity, given that it was unworkable, we felt that the cleanest, straightforward direction was to reduce MSP premiums for all British Columbians starting January 1st, 2018. There will be no requirement to apply. That will be an across the board for every individual in our province. We have increased the income threshold below which no premiums will be payable. We felt that that was a critical piece to increase, and so we've increased that by $2,000 for those who will not pay. Again, it's hard to give examples because MSP is based on families, but just to give you a rough idea, single individuals can now have a household income of $26,000 before they begin paying any premiums, and a couple with 2 children can have a household net income of $35,000 before they begin paying partial premiums. And then I think the most important piece as well on this slide is to recognize that we will immediately establish the MSP task force, which will advise on how to replace and eliminate the premiums and how to replace the revenue from those premiums. So that's work that will begin. We'll be appointing the individuals probably over the fall and expect a report to come back in before the February budget occurs. So this slide speaks to our government's commitment to opportunity and to enhance critical services. And again, I mentioned earlier the fact that a budget doesn't stand alone. This investment in education is a critical investment, not simply for education and for students, but in fact is an economic investment. I'm very proud of the fact that we have increased over 3 years the education budget by $681 million. For the K-12 system. This is $521 million to provide for improved classroom supports for children, and also includes additional capital spending of $50 million to address the space requirements. And as well, it includes $160 million to fund enrollment growth and other pressures. And this is a piece, again, that we feel was critical. It was a discussion with school boards and others who had been expected to manage those enrollment growths, which meant cuts in education in other areas. We are committing in this budget to fully fund that. So that $160 million includes $51 million for 16-17 enrollment growth, so the growth that occurred, and also includes, as I said, the dollars to address other pressures in the system. So this is an important priority for us. This is an important priority for our government, and we believe an important priority for both building a strong economy as well as addressing a school system that for many children has meant their entire school, their entire time in school, over 13 years, without the services and supports that they needed to be able to manage. So this is a large investment. It is one of the large changes in the budget from February, and it's an investment that we believe is an investment for now and into the future. So this slide speaks to the crisis that we're seeing across this province, impacting families, impacting communities, impacting first responders, impacting not-for-profit societies and outreach workers. This is a critical crisis, and we believe government has to commit to join together to fight this crisis. And so we are addressing the fentanyl emergency in this budget. We are joining that fight with $322 million dedicated to a comprehensive response. And I want to take just a minute to talk about where the resources are going. You'll know that there are resources, as you can see here, $25 million over 3 years to establish the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. This is key to fighting this crisis. Having a dedicated minister and a dedicated ministry to be able to focus solely on the issue of mental health and addictions will assist in this crisis. The ministry will provide, and the minister will provide the direction, the leadership, and the sole focus that's needed to work with experts, to look at evidence-based science, to make sure that we put forward the best solutions that are there to address this crisis, and also ultimately to be able to build the seamless approach that we feel is so critical for a mental health system that is not there. If you talk to anyone who's gone through the system or who has a family member who's gone through the system, it is a piecemeal approach right now. We do not have a system where people can navigate the services and supports. And so the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions' sole focus is to address this crisis and to develop that seamless approach. And so the $25 million will provide the resources over those 3 years to be able to ensure that. As the minister directs those services and determines those services, they will continue to be provided through the Ministry of Health. So we're not looking at duplication of providing services and supports. As you know, the health authorities provide those resources, provide the services on the ground. That is not going to change. They will continue to provide those services on the ground, but those services and supports will be directed by the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and make a determination around where those programs are critical. So just to give you an idea of the areas that they're working on, they're looking at the key component, of course, of saving lives. When we talk about the crisis that we're facing, that'll be more supervised consumption sites and services, take-home naloxone kits, and a number of areas there. They're looking at focusing supports on those where it will make the biggest difference. So there are, as you know, demographics around people who are who are seeing the greatest impact of the opioid crisis: First Nations, individuals who are using substances alone, youth with mental health issues. Those are high numbers when you take a look at overdoses and the pressures being faced. And so that will be an area of focus for these additional resources that are going to the Ministry of Health. Provide help quickly when people ask. Again, that, as I said earlier, fits with the fact that people who are ready and who want to make the change aren't able to get the supports that they need. And so we're looking at new treatment beds, new outreach supports, and new types of treatment to try and reach people. And then the last area is the issue of targeted responses. Again, looking at how they identify those who are most at risk and what kinds of programs and supports can be put in place to address those. We also, as part of this investment in the issue of fentanyl, are investing in the public safety and Solicitor General component of this. That includes $25 million that will go towards mid-level fentanyl traffickers and disrupting the drug supply line at the street level. So again, it's important to cut off the drug supply. And $7 million as well goes into that ministry to deal with the pressures in the BC Coroner's Service. This is again an issue where there are huge challenges in this service, in the Coroner's Service, because of this crisis and because of the deaths we've seen in British Columbia. So this just shows, as I said, the increase in enhancing services and the investment in healthcare. The increase over 3 years is $603 million. That increases the 3-year average growth rate for the Ministry of Health from 3.6% a year to 4% a year. So an increase, but we believe a manageable increase. And again, when you're dealing with a crisis, it's important that the resources be invested. This is a crisis that is impacting all of British Columbia, and we believe it's important to ensure that the resources are there to address this crisis, just as we would for our wildfires. We believe it's a crisis that needs to be addressed in our budget, and hence the increase in the Ministry of Health that will go towards that. So this next slide talks about enhancing services. I talked about that as one of the 3 pillars that we're building our budget on, as well, that we built the throne speech on. And these are a number of issues a number of initiatives that address both affordability as well as inequality. So I'll just speak to a few of these. You can see $312 million to start rebuilding the child protection system. That's going to include $147 million to reduce wait lists and strengthen programs and services that provide for the welfare of children and youth. That includes everything from child protection, children and youth in care, family supports, autism programs, and specifics will come out through the ministry on those issues. It includes $120 million for family supports and reunification, for culturally appropriate services, and additional staff for Indigenous communities. Again, if we're taking a look at the challenges being faced in the Ministry for Children and Families around children in care, you know that there's the Grand Chief Ed John report. We are committed to implementing the recommendations in that report, and these investments speak directly to that. Looking at not only providing supports for children who are in care, but doing everything we can to reduce the number of Indigenous children in care, and providing the support and the resources and the frontline workers to be able to do just that. As well, this budget includes $45 million over 3 years for additional youth mental health resources, which we believe is critical. There's $20 million here in 17-18 in this budget for new childcare investments, which again provides support for early childhood development and childcare, raises that budget to $330 million in this fiscal year. And that funding will be focused at the start on increasing childcare spaces. So this will provide resources for about 4,000 new childcare spaces across this province, while we work with the experts to develop the affordable, quality childcare system that is needed for British Columbia. That again is an implementation plan that occurs over time. We're looking forward. I know those discussions have started. You know, we have a Minister of State who's responsible for that. And those discussions will continue on, and you'll see in future budgets further investments to move towards that child care plan that will be critically needed. This also includes, and you've heard this announced already, this also includes $15 million to enhance the Healthy Kids program. That starts September, starts this month, and that provides support for children who now will have access to new hearing assistance benefits, including hearing aids and further dental services as well. There's $114 million to fund income and disability assistance caseloads. I'm not expecting the ministry, with the challenges that they face, to absorb this, but in fact to provide the resources to enable them to be able to fund the caseload. And then the initial funding, $1.55 million to support the initial work to begin developing the comprehensive poverty reduction plan, which will include a basic income pilot to determine how effective that will be. And again, I have to say how proud I am to include this in our budget, being the only province in all of Canada that has not had a poverty reduction plan. When we talk about truly addressing poverty, we have a number of commitments in this budget that will begin to work on addressing poverty. But to truly do that, we need a comprehensive plan that, again, covers off all the challenges being faced by individuals who are living in poverty. So this includes the planning resources to get that started and to put together the team who's going to work on this cross-ministerial as well. I mentioned earlier that I'd be working with the minister responsible for housing on developing a comprehensive housing strategy. That's going to be something that will occur. But we also wanted to make sure, I mentioned earlier our capital build. There's also another critical piece being faced by renters, by tenants in our province. And that's the crisis for individuals when it comes to dealing with a lack of fairness by both landlords and tenants. And there is a real crisis right now when it comes to the residential tenancy branch. There are huge backlogs. I talk to people who are waiting months to be able to be heard. That's not good for tenants, that's not good for landlords, and we feel it's critical to begin to address this. So there's $7 million for the residential tenancy branch, which will fund 30 new FTEs to begin addressing that backlog, to reduce wait times for landlord and tenant disputes, and also to start building up the compliance unit in the residential tenancy branch, which will be able to then take meaningful action against landlords and tenants who are repeat offenders or serious offenders. As the rental market has tightened, this has become more of a crisis for individuals who are facing disputes. Again, as I said, both tenants and landlords. That's caused some of the challenge that we see, and the backlog's not good for anyone. So I'm very pleased to say that we have increased those resources by $7 million in this budget to begin to address that crisis. Building a strong and sustainable economy, as I mentioned, this speaks to the support that we need to provide opportunities for people. You will know that the previous government put in place tuition costs for adult basic education and English language learning. Short-sighted and not a positive direction as well for building a strong economy, to provide individuals with the ability to improve their skills, to be able to better support their family, to be able to improve their employment prospects, is good for them and it's good for the economy. It's good for building a strong economy. And so again, in this budget, you'll know it's already been announced so that we could start seeing the support for September. We've included $19 million to restore tuition-free adult basic education and English language learning, both in post-secondary institutions as well as school districts. Because in some communities, the school district is where those programs and services are provided, particularly in smaller communities that may not have a post-secondary institution. And so this will provide the support that is there. There isn't, if you look at the tracking of the budget, you'll see that there's not funding yet for 2018-19 and 19-20, because again, the costs are unclear until we know what the enrollment looks like. So we will provide the support that's needed to build that into our February budget coming up once we know the actual enrollment numbers. And certainly I've been hearing from people across BC, particularly small communities, that they're starting to see a real increase in enrollment, that people are coming back to the colleges again, and that's what we want. That is a positive for all of us. So that's a critical investment and a critical piece. And as you'll know, this measure also complements the measure that we put in place for children in care, former children in care, to be able to receive free tuition. And those resources are going to be absorbed by the existing ministry. And then again, we'll take a look at the actual numbers. We hope they'll increase. That's a positive, to see an increase in former children in care being able to access post-secondary. It's a benefit for all of us. And then those numbers will be built in again in the budget in February. And then another piece, again, to complement the increase in the support allowance for individuals on income assistance and disabilities, we're also going to increase earnings exemptions for those individuals by $200 a month. So that means that an individual receiving income assistance will now be able to earn up to $600 a month on top of their monthly benefits, while a single person receiving disability assistance will be able to earn up to $1,200 $12,000 a year on top of their monthly benefits. You may know that people on disabilities, because it's a more permanent challenge, receive their exemptions over a year. That's spread out over a year, and so that's why that number is monthly for individuals on income assistance, temporary income assistance, and a yearly amount for the individuals who are on disabilities. And that's up from $9,600 that they currently can earn in a year. So I mentioned earlier the wildfire season that we faced and the challenges that that's created. First and foremost, obviously, are the supports for the individuals, for the businesses in those communities. And that does obviously have an impact on the budget and the numbers in the budget update. So this budget update includes an increase in the fire management budget from $63 million in February to $506 million in direct costs. We believe that this will cover the costs for the season. Again, it's an unknown. The ability to be able to spend if we increase obviously is there because it's a statutory authority that exists. But we feel that this is a reasonable number for the amount of resources that will be needed over the year. You know that there's $100 million that was provided to the Red Cross to support people and communities impacted. But we're also putting in some resources that will address the immediate and we hope the future challenges that are going to be faced as well. The $50 million that's here will be new capital funding, and that's for the BC Wildfire Services, for infrastructure, for everything from buildings to air tankers to trailers. And so the ministry feels that they'll have the opportunity to be able to update 10 wildfire bases across the province that will be improved with these resources. And again, that's critical infrastructure for now and into the future. And the budget also includes $140 million for spending that will include, we hope, the prevention work for future fire seasons. That'll include everything from wildfire risk reduction work, rehabilitation of diseased and/or wildfire damaged forests. And the next intake for those projects will start in November 2017, and there are a number of individuals or organizations that have the opportunity to apply for those resources. That includes everyone from local governments to First Nations governments. Small area-based tenures like community forests and woodlots will all have access to those resources, again, to do the prevention work that we hope will address the critical work that needs to be done before we move in to the next fire season that's ahead. So this slide speaks to 3 of the economic initiatives that we are putting in place to help support innovation, to help support business development, and to help support fairness into the future. As you know, these were initiatives that were worked on with the Green Caucus, with the Green Party through the Confidence and Supply Agreement, and I'm really pleased to see them included in this budget update. Starting with the Innovation Commissioner, this will be a $3 million commitment over 3 years. And this commissioner will support innovation and business development in the technology sector with a mandate to advocate for our technology sector. As you all know, it's a sector that has really increased and provides a huge support to our economic base. This is the cost to get the commissioner up and running. And then, as I said, the work will begin around looking at how we not only continue to see that growth, but continue to see further growth in that particular area. The Emerging Economy Task Force, $1.4 million over 2 years. And this is really a task force to look at the changing nature of business over the next few decades and how government policy can best be used to take advantage of the new economic opportunities that will come. And the requirement for this task force is to report into government within a year of the first sitting of the legislature. So they've got a lot of work to do and a lot of work ahead of them. And the Fair Wages Commission, again, this has already been announced, so you'll be aware of this. This includes $500,000 over 2 years. Again, we expect that they'll get started to work. As you know, this is going to be a body that's going to provide advice to government around the implementation plan to get to $15 an hour as minimum wage, an implementation plan that will work for employees as well as employers. And that will be something that, again, will be reported back to government. So this slide speaks to improving tax fairness, ensuring that everyone in our province contributes and that everyone benefits from the resources and the strength of our economy. So we're going to begin with two pieces that will be no surprise to anyone. These are commitments that we made during the election, and they are commitments that we have built into this budget. We begin with increasing the individual income tax rate to 16.8%. Up from 14.7% on individual taxable income over $150,000. So you'll remember this was a tax increase that was brought in a few years ago by the past government. Then they eliminated it after the election, the past election. We are bringing that back. This is the top 2% of income earners in British Columbia who will pay this. This is a tax on the income they earn over $150,000. Not up to $150,000. It's income over $150,000, and it's individual income, not family income. And we believe those at the top can pay a little bit more to be able to contribute to the services and programs that need to be provided for all British Columbians and the benefit all British Columbians. We're also increasing the general corporate income tax rate from 11% to 12%, and this again keeps us competitive with the Western provinces, with Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Again, we believe that they can pay a little bit more to be able to contribute to the services and programs that are a benefit to everyone. When you're taking a look at large employers, I've certainly heard the concerns around a lack of support for everything from childcare to affordable housing and the struggles that individuals and businesses and corporations are having finding employees because of those pressures. So other investments, key investments that we're making in this budget will contribute to supporting those corporations in being able to take a look at both retention as well as attracting talent to their businesses. This budget update also eliminates the International Business Activity Program. This program has been in place in British Columbia for about 30 years. It provides tax breaks on provincial corporate income tax to international financial organizations. The intent, it appears, was to spur investment and create jobs in our province, but in examining this program, there appeared to be very little evidence, concrete evidence, on jobs that have been created, and as such, the program is being eliminated. And this program provided tens of millions of dollars that were given out in tax refunds to companies, to investors, and to banks. And again, we believe that every dollar needs to be accountable, and we felt that there wasn't enough evidence to show that these were dollars well spent, and therefore the program is eliminated. So as we take a look at our economic growth in British Columbia, we believe it's important to continue to focus on our competitiveness. I mentioned even with the increase in the corporate tax rate, we remain competitive with our Western provinces, and we are taking steps in this budget update to provide supports for businesses who are investing in our province and supporting our economy. So the first piece has been a topic of discussion for a number of businesses, and certainly was a request that came forward once again by the Tax Competitive Panel, and that's the issue of charging of PST on electricity for industry. So with this budget, we're going to phase out the PST on electricity beginning this fall with a 50% cut and full elimination by 2019. We believe that this is a smart investment, again, in making sure that our businesses remain competitive in British Columbia while encouraging businesses to look at clean energy and addressing climate action as well. So this has an effect and a positive effect, we believe, in both particular areas. We also know that small businesses really are the backbone of our economy, and we are providing them with a reduction in their small business corporate income tax rate from 2.5% to 2%. Again, we believe a smart investment. Local small businesses spend their resources in the communities that they're in. That's an investment in resources that are circulated back through our economy, and we believe provide good, strong support for economic growth. And the last piece is to restore the tax treatment for credit unions. This will give back $15 million a year to credit unions to reinvest in their communities. And for those particularly who live in rural communities, often the credit union is the only financial institution in that community and the only financial institution that provides support to small businesses. And every investment that a credit union makes stays with their members, gets circulated back into the economy, and so is a real boost. As I said, credit unions are across British Columbia, but this is particularly a boost for our rural communities because there aren't other options that are available for them in those communities. So I just want to speak for a few minutes about the issue of climate action and carbon pricing. You know that our third pillar that is critical to us as a government is the issue of building a sustainable economy with good jobs in every corner of our province. And we know that addressing global climate change is not simply just a responsibility, but in fact is also a strong economic tool. A tool to be able to create jobs and a tool to be able to grow our economy. So starting April 1st, 2018, we're going to increase BC's carbon tax by $5 a ton. That will take us, you know that there's a pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change agreement timeline. This is going to take us to a year ahead of that timeline to reach the $50 a ton that is required. And we are also in this budget removing the requirement for revenue neutrality for the carbon tax. You will know again that we committed that we would use carbon tax revenue to both provide a tax support to low and middle income families who will pay more as the carbon tax increases. We want to make sure we're providing them with support. And we also want to ensure that we're providing the green initiatives that will assist people in changing their behavior, whether we're talking about transit, whether we're talking about retrofitting homes. We want to also ensure that the resources that come in on the carbon tax are used for green initiatives as well. And so you will see the revenue neutrality shift in this budget and the low and middle income climate action credit increased. That's a credit, for those of you who aren't aware, that's a credit that's paid out in 4 quarterly payments. And the first enhanced payment will be April 2018. And that will increase, we're increasing the credit to match the increase in the carbon tax. So it's increased about 17%, which is the percentage increase in the carbon tax. So providing those resources to low-income families, we believe is a critical piece of climate action. So this slide points again to changes in the Budget 2017 update compared to the February budget. It's a pretty straightforward slide for those of you who want a quick glance at where the changes have occurred. As you can see, we have a balanced budget, balanced with a 17-18 surplus forecast at $246 million. Our debt remains affordable. The forecast allowance has been reduced by $50 million for 17-18 and increased in the out years. And I mentioned the increase in the contingency vote for 17-18, again, to address those programs and services I talked about, where there may be details still to come around the cost pressures and the enrollment numbers in those new programs, as well as I mentioned earlier, the bus pass, which is a program that is still in development, and we wanted to ensure that the resources were there. So I think this lays out very well the balanced approach that we're taking with this budget, the investment in people as a priority to build the strong economy, that they are not either or, that they are both critical, and I think identifies the important priorities that we have as a government. So just to summarize, thank you for your patience as we've walked through this. Just to summarize, as I said, the budget really does invest in people to invest in British Columbia. And I can't emphasize that enough. If you're looking for a difference in past budgets that have come forward, I am a big believer that a budget does not stand alone. That a budget is a tool to make sure that the people of this province who built our economy benefit from the economy. Our strong economy wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the people in British Columbia who work hard every day, who provide their resources to government through their taxes. And we believe it's important for the public to see the benefits of the strength in the economy and give them the tools and the opportunities to contribute to that strong economy. So thank you. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be able to be finance minister for our province and to present a budget that I believe provides an opportunity to a path to be able to invest in people in British Columbia and their priorities as a first priority for government. So I look forward to coming back for your questions. Thank you.